Okay, this is another reason small might be attractive. In other words, when you look at all those charts, you say we got to do something other than a large reactor. The economies of scale argument that we used did not pan out. Let's take a look at the safety question. Now, this is an eye chart for my purposes, but um, for safety, one of the key requirements is to keep the core cool. Because when the core heats up, it produces gases and bubbles, and you get hydrogen, which is explosive. When you saw Fukushima, how many people saw the movie? Not the movie, but the video of Fukushima exploding. How many hands? One hand. Well, for those of you who haven't seen that, please Google it. Well, again, 3 seconds of your life will learn you a lot, and it's just too trivial to find this out. That was a hydrogen explosion, and that occurred because the cooling of the reactor failed because uh, a tsunami wave knocked out the electrical diesel generators that were there for emergency supply, and they couldn't keep the water flowing over the fuel, and the fuel produced a bubble, and that bubble heated up, and it became a melting down of the zirconium cladding on the uranium fuel, and we'll see that Friday. We'll talk about cladding and fuel. I think we sort of talked about that a little in the last lecture. In any case, it produced hydrogen, and it wasn't properly vented, and it exploded. Um, there was a loss of coolant accident, the dispersal of radioactivity, and there was a core meltdown. Now, most reactors are like in that reactor. That are operating are light water reactors in the world. They're either boiling or pressurized water reactors of GE or Westinghouse original designs that have been copied or amplified by other countries. Combustion engineering is another vendor design that became popular. Um, to take care of that kind of accident, reactors originally, which remember were smaller, had very substantial containment buildings. When the economy of scale argument started to be popularized and there was a push to make these things bigger, there also was a lot of pressure from industry on the regulators to relent on demanding very much in the way of containment. And they came up with ways to make the containment less substantial. And the reason why is the containment was really expensive. uh, so the requirements in the 60s were loosened on the amount of containment that was required. If you take a look at the General Electric design, which was the one at, I think it was the Mark 1 and 2 design. I shouldn't get into Mark 1 and Mark 2. The early design of the General Electric machine, which we have several of here in the States, is the machine that was built at Fukushima. It did not have very substantial containment. And the reasoning was, well, we can figure out a way to have emergency cooling. They shaved ice that would fall down and reduce any heat problem. Didn't work, and there wasn't a sufficient number of additional barriers or very substantial containment. That explains the hydrogen explosion release and the problems at Fukushima. That was a function of wanting to do economies of scale, of enlarging the reactor, but trying to keep the costs under control by not demanding as much containment. They also compounded the problem. I think this is a little bit argumentative, I'd say, but I like it. And you can judge how much weight to give it. Um, we'll talk about this. The federal government, to promote nuclear energy in 1957, said that for 10 years, any damages off site that are incurred by the release of radioactivity from an accident will be capped, the liability be capped. Uh, kind of like, uh, if you will, we want young people to drive cars. And what we will do is we know that they might have an accident, but what we'll do is let them drive and we will subsidize their insurance and cap their liability if they hurt anybody, so that more people who are young can drive. Well, essentially, this was the thought process here to get the industry going. It made some sense. Now, because it was temporary and was only supposed to last for 10 years, it's now been extended 40 years into the future. There's nothing quite as permanent as a temporary grant of a subsidy. And so now I think Price Anderson was the name of this legislation that capped the liability. And it was just extended without a hearing, without in a continuing resolution type legislation or omnibus bill until the year 2040, which is kind of breathtaking. In any case, why do you bring that up? Well, if you don't have to pay very much for the liability and for damages for an accident, you might not pay as much personal attention to safety. Just a thought. Let's turn the page. Again, argumentative. I could be right. uh, it's a factor. I don't know how much to weight it. Okay, now here's a good example of a small non-modular reactor, the Halem nuclear power plant 62. And you'll notice that it just looks like a big cell block. The entire building is a containment building. You'll notice that the reactors with the cores are not visible. They're all inside that big containment building. But the design of 3 Mile Island, which is interesting because there was an accident and a minor release of radioactivity. Those things are not encased in a single building. They're allowed to be individually encased, if you will, with a lot of the rest of the building and the operation of it in separate buildings. Now, why is that a concern? You could say, well, the reactor core is in a building. It's but the steam generators, the pipes going to and from the electrical generator and everything, that's outside and is not in a containment building. Well, you might want it all to be in the containment building. I think we're seeing this in Zaporizhia, where the spent fuel pond, for example, is inside the building. And I think in the case of 3 Mile Island, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure the spent fuel pond is outside of the containment building. That's in the case of Zaporizhia, that could have been a disaster if that was the case. Well, you get the picture. Certainly, the character of containment in 62 versus the 70s, when they made this decision, went from pretty tough to a lot less tough. And the hope was that, well, it'd be safe enough and you get the economies of scale and it would be worth it. Okay, there you go. Maybe I should stop just a moment here. Are there questions? I mean, I've exposed you to a lot of concepts, and there are a few more yet to come. I don't mean to browbeat here, folks. No question?
I just have a small one, and it's about your picture of 3 Mile Island there.
Yeah.
The smaller conical uh, conical things there, that is the calendaria.
Excuse me.
Are those?
They have, I think calendaria is a reference to a heavy water reactor, isn't it?
Yeah, or is that the main like reactor chamber where the water is and the rods
Well,
are?
you can see
I should
those
say.
two. trash cans, if you will, with lids on them,
That's
right?
what I'm talking about. Yep.
Okay, they contain what you see in the graphic over to the side.
Okay.
Does that help? They have
Yeah.
also the steam generators are there with them, but mostly just that. And the control room, the spent fuel pond, is the steam generator pipes to the cooling towers. Uh, all of that, I think, is exterior to that. Now, those things can get hit, and that could be a problem. Now, luckily, we're not in Ukraine, right? Luckily, no one would ever imagine that someone might use a drone to cause havoc. That would never happen. By the way, I think the number of overflights of nuclear power plants by drones, I'm sure, is now controlled unclassified information. But the last time it was released, the number was north of 50 in the previous, I don't know, 48 months or something. I mean, it happens a lot. You better hope that there's just, hobbyists. I'm all for that. It might be fun, but if it was somebody hostile, having all that stuff exposed could become an issue in the future. Um, anyway, a paranoid thought. Let's go to the next slide.
Also, Henry, just so you know, it is almost 6 and we have them until 6:30. So just
All right. Well, we'll move along. Uh, all right. Well, I described the hydrogen blast and the lack of really serious containment or filters in the case of Fukushima. 3 Mile Island uh, did have a release. Luckily, it wasn't too extreme. Um, Chernobyl, that was pretty awful. All three involved severe nuclear core meltdowns. The 3 Mile Island core meltdown was not minor; it was very serious. And we only discovered that well after the accident. But it was pretty serious. It wasn't supposed to happen. It did. So the large reactors, have a couple of points against them. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, this is another damning. Even with lax containment requirements, the complexity and construction costs continue to grow, and you can see the line uh, uh, with the. What you don't have is a time factor here. Cumulative capacity. It's represented by the cumulative capacity, which grows over time. But it should be that as the cumulative global capacity grows, the cost per kilowatt should go down. You'll notice just the opposite. Again, I mean, I keep coming back to this because the standard thing you'll hear every journalist and every uh, commentator, whether they're on the left or right, is, well, all this is because of regulations. Well, uh, uh,
sorry, folks. I have a feeling that Henry's computer died, but he'll probably be back in a couple minutes. Just hang tight. Now might be a good time to grab some water or go to
okay, I'm
bed.
sorry. That was
Serious. Okay, great.
okay. This suggests this is a global problem. You'll notice that Japan, France, I don't know what's CA. I guess that's Canada, India. Places where we can get real data. It's not looking good, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission only accounts for some of the red dots. That's it. I mean, so there's a problem bigger than some standard trope. Which is, well, if we. By the way, I'd be happy to see us get rid of the nuclear regulatory system and see how it works. Would that solve it? I kind of doubt it. By the way, the industry would be the first screaming, "Don't get rid of it." That's what we need to argue that our plants are safe because we follow all these very strict rules. So there's some funny business with that argument, I think. It should not be taken as seriously as it is. Let's go to the next slide. Well, this is just Price Anderson, which has been extended till 2040. Essentially, there is a pool of about a $500 million that all of the reactor operators in the United States pay into. That's what we've got. And if there's an accident, they have 7 years to pay out another 12 something billion. And some self-insurance. So it comes up to around 13 billion. If the Secretary of Energy decides that it wouldn't be too onerous, if he thinks it's too onerous, that the accident damage off-site of any accident in the future in the US would be covered by you and I. Now, why does that not seem right? And why would that maybe not encourage enough and self-investment in safety? Well, if you only have to pay at most 13 billion for a single accident, and the last accident, Fukushima, ranges between 200 billion to a trillion, and Chernobyl was 200 billion, and even 3 Mile Island was 1.78 billion, you get the impression that you might be underinsuring yourself here. And when you underinsure and you're allowed to do so, it doesn't encourage putting a safety harness in your car. You're fine until the accident occurs, and when the accident occurs, it's someone else's problem. It's not yours, or at least a big chunk of the problem isn't yours. I think again, this is a little argumentative, but I can't resist, and maybe I should. But there's something wrong here. We need to add some zeros to the liability. Someone needs to pick that up, other than somebody in industry needs to pick that up rather than just the taxpayer. All right. In any case, let's go to the next one, because I do think that's kind of an argumentative thing. I'm not sure it should be given much weight.